Excuse me.
No problem.
All right. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here, and Karen Kataline is my guest. Karen is a conservative activist in Colorado. She's gotten in various political issues out there, and the thing that's interesting to me in particular is that she's unusual in that she's a conservative Jewish woman who is in public and who is active. Karen, thanks again for joining me.
Well, it's great to be with you. Thank you so much, Charles.
Now, Karen, I want to ask you right off the bat if you have an opinion about the resignation of Barry Weiss at the New York Times. She was a young Jewish woman, not particularly conservative, but kind of a mainstream, maybe slightly right of center, who was who claimed she was under a barrage of attack for covering Israel, for getting into Jewish issues, with some rather nasty remarks made about that to her by the staff at the New York Times, and that she was not in any way supported by the editorial heads of the editorial department. And so she resigned in a huff. And then they countered by saying, well, you made accusations when you were at Columbia University that some of the professors were anti-Semitic, which I think is, by most objective standards, probably pretty accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And sounds like she's really quite a figure in terms of taking on this establishment. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I'm glad that she spoke out. From all that I can gather, and I got to tell you, I don't read the New York Times much now
Nor do
or
I.
before. The interesting thing, as an aside, is that you can know the very latest thing the left is pushing because they're all pushing it en masse. They very rarely speak outside of the lockstep narrative that they're pushing, which is what Barry Weiss was fighting against. I don't think there's anything conservative about her at all, but she sounds like she's finally, you know what they used to say, oftentimes a Republican is a Democrat who's been mugged. Well, it sounds like she
Yeah.
got mugged as a journalist. And I went to Columbia School of Social Work, of all places.
Mm-hmm.
While it wasn't as anti Semitic as it is today, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see what they're pushing, both at the New York Times and Columbia University and many college campuses around the country. Jew hatred and anti-Semitism is right up there with the leftist platform, but they refuse to admit it. So, in fact, I just read on Facebook that Nancy Pelosi is supporting Ilhan Omar. Gee, what a shock.
Oh, really? I mean, talk the biggest anti-Semite in Congress. Now,
Yeah.
I do think, however, that we have to be careful using the term anti-Semitism because there are legitimate criticisms of Israeli policy. I kind of draw the line between criticizing Israel normally and those who criticize Israel because they don't recognize Israel's right to exist, which I think does cross into anti-Semitism. Having said that, there are liberal left Jewish organizations like the ADL, which, while I admire their work in terms of exposing genuine anti Semitism, they do tend toward the idea that anyone who doesn't agree with the left is anti Semitic. So, they kind of read the tea leaves on that a bit. So I think that if we're going to legitimately oppose the real anti Semitism on the left, we also have to criticize the left, the Jewish left, if you will, and they're overreaching in terms of describing anti Semitism. What say you, Karen? Karen, you seem to have frozen up on me. I think we might be having a little bit of a technical problem here. Anyway, my guest is Karen Kataline, and Karen's blog site is karenkataline.com, where she has some amazing articles and other matters. Looks like she might have dropped off briefly here. I think she'll be right back, hopefully. Um, anyways, the issue with okay, the issue we're talking about is the uh, resignation of Barry Weiss, who was an outspoken columnist at the New York Times.
Hello?
There
Hello.
you are. I don't know, Karen. You seem to have broken up on me a bit. That's all right.
I know. I was talking, and then all of a sudden I got that little whirligig that said,
Oh boy.
not happening. What I
Maybe
was
the
saying,
ADL might have stepped in there. I don't know. Anyway, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
what I was saying was my experience of the Jewish left, and there's a whole bunch of that and many flavors, is that they don't seem to care much about Jews, the Jewish people, or Israel at all. And they only talk about Jew hatred when it's convenient to fight the conservatives once again, but they pull it out for just special occasions, like, oh, they don't mind coming to the defense of a self-hating Jew like George Soros. But when it comes to standing up for the Jewish people, standing up for Israel, as you put it, the right to exist, they're missing in action. So, um, I have plenty of issues with the Jewish left because they're the loudest, and yet they're the least Jewish of all. They're ethnically Jewish, but not too Jewish in any other respect. Their religion is liberalism, not Judaism.
Yes, I think that's well stated. And they also are doing this so-called intersectionality with some pretty anti-Semitic organizations like Black Lives Matter, for example,
Such a
and
good point.
Antifa.
Yeah, yeah, and they don't seem to have a problem with that because they're buying into the notion that it is our job as, I mean, some people think we're white. I think I'm white, a Caucasian, right? A Caucasian Jew with
Mm-hmm.
Semitic background, that somehow it is our job to roll over, kneel, and bow down to other groups for things, number one, we did not do. And that's all a part of the agenda, which really has nothing to do with being Jewish. I wish I could have some of them on my show. They don't want to come on
Same
my
here.
show's spouting off because I would say, we were slaves too, and we're not asking for reparations because those people aren't alive, and I'm not holding the people living today accountable for the slavery that we experienced 5,000 some years ago.
Well, I mean, the whole idea of bowing down is anti-Jewish because, after all, anybody who knows the story of Purim and the story of Esther, it was
Yes.
Mordecai was told that he had to bow down to Haman, and he said, "I don't bow down to anyone but God," and that's
Touche.
right. That's the position
And that's
that
what
we
Trump
take.
just said. Remember, Trump just said that at the Mount Rushmore.
Yes,
We
he
don't
did.
bow down to anybody but God. And that's why the so-called Judeo-Christian idea of America is so consistent with what we know as monotheistic Judaism.
Absolutely. I take a little credit for Trump having said that because I tweeted it
You
to
do?
him.
Good for you.
And I know he reads his
You.
tweets. And he said it the day after I tweeted it.
I love
So
it.
yeah, why not? He
Why not?
listens to people, and he's very receptive. Um, but you make the point quite well, Karen. That they're very conveniently Jewish if it's something that matches up with the left wing agenda. Or we could look at groups like Jewish Voices for Peace, which is openly anti-Israel
Hmm.
and which is on college campuses. We don't know who finances it. It's a pretty big group, and they're very intimidating toward Jewish students who are part of Hillel, who are part of not part of their group, and they're very demanding. They have to infiltrate Hillel. I mean, it's a pretty bad scene.
Terrible.
Yeah.
And even at, most of the college campuses are anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. And I might take a humble issue with you when you say we have to be careful. I don't think the average conservative is into pointing fingers and accusing everybody of racism, or even anti-Semitism. But the fact of the matter is, we have to pay attention to our opponents and how everybody's racist if you don't agree with them, and their Jew hatred is as obvious as the noses on our face. From the BDSM movement to the out and out hatred towards Israel that is now really part of the platform of the Democrat Party. And I don't mind being in your face as far as that's concerned, because we have too many Jews who don't even know about it. They're not self-hating Jews, but they don't seem to understand or appreciate how blatantly anti-Semitic the current incarnation of the Democrat Party is today.
Well, I think that we like to call out racists and anti-Semites when we see them, and it's usually people on the left more often. The left uses terms like racist and anti-Semite not to describe genuine racism or anti-Semitism, but to describe anyone that doesn't agree with them.
Exactly.
I mean, if you're pro-life, you're an anti-Semite, that
if
kind
you're
of thing.
pro enforcing our borders, you are
You're an anti-Semite,
immediately
exactly.
a xenophobe. It is
xenophobe. That's a popular word. Yeah, exactly.
It's a political tactic, which now we are seeing what the political tactic is used for. The political tactic is used to embolden criminals of all ethnicities to turn against their neighbor, to destroy American culture, and to frankly use them as useful idiots, because the Black communities in the inner city are the ones that are getting hammered first by these so-called, that I would call useful idiots, and they're inciting hatred. That's why I got to tell you, and it's kind of related, and it's not, forgive me, I've got a sound on. Films like, I love Larry Elder, and I have a very soft spot in my heart for Black conservatives like Larry Elder and his new film, Uncle Tom, which I haven't seen yet, but I plan to, because Black conservatives are telling the truth to the Black community, have bought into this plantation mentality. It's just the government is the new plantation. And the people that are getting hurt by this ideology are Black inner city people who are the victims of criminals who are being let out of jail. So, given the virulent kind of nature of what we are seeing today, I'm going around the bend here, but what I'm really referring to is that when you make the point that we call out leftist anti-Semites and that we have to do that, it is because they are so virulent and they're not being called out. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Sometimes I get 2 points in my head at the same time.
There you go. Well, it's because you're a true intellectual.
I don't know about that. That might be an insult. So I'm not sure.
No. Well, it depends on whom we're saying it about. In your case, it's
there
not.
You go.
Karen, let me ask you your opinion on this. I mean, you have in an election year, we have Democrat shock troops looting Black neighborhoods, burning Black businesses, killing Black people, creating mayhem. You have a Democrat establishment calling for the defunding of the police, which has resulted in more murders of Black people in the big cities. Chicago saw almost 100 murders the weekend after the George Floyd incident, most of whom were Black, 3 of whom were children. We've seen an increase in cities across the country. We've seen Democrat-leaning groups and people tearing down statues of Ulysses S. Grant, defacing a statue of the Black Union troops in Boston in front of the State House, the Shaw Memorial, and taking down statues of Lincoln. How is this going to be a strategy for them to win the election and get Black votes?
Well, first, I think you have to do something that a lot of longtime political watchers, and I'm not as long time as many of the people that I know. I guess you could say that I was an avid political watcher for the last 25 years. That's not long in the scheme of things.
Right.
And many of them want to, not you, apply what they know from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago to what's happening now. I maintain that what's happening now is unlike anything we've ever seen, unlike anything we've ever watched, because the decades-long planning of trying to take this country overthrow of America, for globalist one world government socialism / communism. And no, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. You just got to watch it, what's happening. The left is marching in lockstep to divorce itself from the rule of law and from common sense. When you put all that together, none of this is like any other year. I wouldn't be surprised at anything that happens. To me, under normal circumstances, they would never go this route. Look at 1968. It only came back to bite them in the rear. And yet they're not learning, because I think the deep state and all of this, this opposition that has been building over some decades in earnest since the previous administration, I think they are going for broke this time. They know that Donald Trump stands in the way of everything they've been wanting to have happen. I think that what's happening now was probably planned for, God forbid, the third or fourth year of the second term of Hillary Clinton. It was not supposed to happen now, and they had to move up their timeline because Donald Trump is up for re-election. I don't think this is only about Donald Trump, but I believe that he and his earnest supporters stand in the way of everything that they want and have been planning for this country. And now the mask is off. That's why I love the idea of a mask. Everything about the mask is symbolic about what's happening now. So to answer your question all the way around the bend, I'm sorry, I'm a talk show host.
No, this is great.
Is I will not be surprised at anything I see, especially if we do not mount constant fight back, constant pushback on everything. I hate to be crass, but I just posted a meme on Facebook. If you roll over now, you'll be bending over later. Okay? So you have to fight back on every front because they're going for broke. I don't believe the polls, but I think we have to believe them in order to fight back. You should believe he's 10 points behind no matter what, and know that everything they talk about, from the mail-in ballots to all of it. One last point that is all encompassing of what I'm saying. I've been saying on talk radio for a long time, this is a virulent left that refused to give up the 2016 election. They would not give it up for 3.5 years. Now we're less than 3 months away from the biggest election since 2016, and they refuse to begin the election of 2020. Does this feel like an election year to you? No, it is nothing of the sort. They won't let people go to Trump rallies because they know they'll lose. They won't let Biden out of his basement because they know he makes a jerk of himself. They're trying to prosecute this election with coronavirus, with riots, and with bullying and intimidation tactics. So we got to know that going in, that this is unlike any other year we've ever seen.
It is. It's unprecedented. It's probably the most important election in our lifetime, certainly is.
Except for 2016.
and your point that they've never really conceded the election, I think that it looks like that is coming to a boil now with the Durham investigation.
I've been to God's ears.
Yeah, I mean, I've been hearing that there are going to be indictments coming down. There's going to be some big players involved in exposure as people who tried to essentially effect a coup d'etat against the government. And I think that Durham has a reputation for being very careful. He worked for Obama. He worked for the Bushes.
And
he's nonpartisan.
That worries me, Charles.
No. But what I'm saying is he's got the credibility. In Boston, where I am, he was involved with cracking the whole Whitey Bulger mafia connection. I mean, he's been around the horn a while, and he seems to go in very carefully and really dot the I's and cross the T's before he comes out with his report. So, yes, it's worrisome. Maybe he might be a deep stater. I don't think so at this point. I think he is going to do it. I think he's going to pull the trigger sometime in the next week or two. And I think that also is one of the reasons why this whole rotten coup that has not recognized the election is engaging in such horrendous anti-American activity, whether it be locking people down in the house with fear tactics about the virus, which I think is overblown, or whether it be the killing of black people and the looting of black neighborhoods to galvanize their predominantly white left-wing supporters.
Mm-hmm.
They're playing hardball, and I think that it's all coming up to a head.
Like I said, from your mouth to God's ears, I hope. I mean, I'm not all that observant, but in times like this can make you a lot more religious. You
Oh, it
can
does.
keep praying. When I
No, I
like
pray. I pray to God every day for Trump and for his safety and that of his
yes,
family. I mean,
yes.
what do you think of? By the way, speaking of which, not that we know much yet about it, but the murder of the family of this federal judge in New York. Um,
Hmm.
she had just taken on as a judge was going to be presiding over a case that involved Deutsche Bank and Jeffrey Epstein.
Hmm.
And then this guy shows up dressed as a FedEx driver at her house, shoots her husband, kills her 20-year-old son while she's in the basement. I mean, I don't, they say that he's some kind of a nut, and I don't doubt that. And he was anti-feminist, fine, but he was a
What does that
lawyer who
even
brought
mean?
cases. Who knows?
Anti-feminist?
But the point is that
I
I
don't know.
just wonder if this isn't a way to intimidate and scare a federal judge who might have been looking into something that is really a tip of the iceberg in terms of some real rotten goings on in this country and in this world.
Well, it is disheartening, Charles, that we continue to see the level of corruption, the level of lies and deceit, bullying and intimidation. And unfortunately, we can only conjecture about what is going on. I mean, if this much that we're seeing is out there up front, where you can look at it, where every citizen, if they want to, can see it, just imagine what's happening behind the scenes that we don't know. And I have no comment because I don't know enough about it. I will only say that not very much surprises me these days.
Yes,
And when you have a lot to protect, it's easy to justify the unjustifiable.
it is, and they'll do anything to. They feel perfectly justified because they're communists. I mean, you can trust a communist to be a communist.
Yeah,
Anything
the end
goes.
justifies the means. That's
Yeah,
what it
they're
is.
utopians. They
Yeah,
believe that they're
because
creating this
we
worldly utopia, and that
we
anything
know what's best,
standing in the
and
way is
we know
is
what's best, and it doesn't matter how much collateral damage, it doesn't matter how many people we hurt, but it's a cult. you know
yeah.
i talked to I talked to someone I wanted to have on my show who said, nah, the right isn't a cult, the left isn't a cult, the Trump supporters aren't a cult, but he has a very narrow definition. But when you look at the overlap between cults and the fact that they demonize anybody who disagrees, they want to separate and alienate people from their friends, from their family. They're secretive. There's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of virtue signaling in cults. You know, we are better than the people who have not been enlightened yet. And therefore, if you take the notion of victimhood, which is so used and so sadly effective in the leftist playbook, that can justify any manner of destruction, from even, God forbid, killing innocent people, burning down buildings and businesses and cities because you're a victim. I mean, that's
Oh yeah.
that's
If
pretty
you're a victim,
terrifying.
morality goes right out the window.
That's
Anything
right.
is justified because you feel like society owes you something, and it's a completely warped point of view. Not to
Yeah,
suggest that there aren't individual cases where someone is a victim, of
right.
course. We're
You're so
talking more
fair
about a
minded.
mindset.
Yes, but also combine that with the notion that uh, the collectivism that's all a part of, and the lack of personal responsibility. In order to have collectivism, you have to absolve people of personal responsibility. And look how many decades they've been doing that. For decades, the left always came to the aid and the defense of criminals, but they would never come to the aid and defense of the victims, the true victims, and law abiding citizens. So they were constantly saying that criminals were victims. That's why they like to let them out of jail, because after all, whatever they did is not their fault. The same thing with, pardon me?
No, that's right. I mean, I get it.
Systemic racism means that you never have to say you're sorry, right? Systemic racism means that you could be a double murderer, as in the case of O.J. Simpson. And if you can claim that somebody else is a racist, you don't have to take responsibility for that. That's what is so deadly. You combine the victimhood with the collectivism that I don't have to take responsibility because I'm a victim and I'm not responsible. And those things are conditions that are necessary for socialism to advance. And that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's very intoxicating also because the socialists invents the world every day. I mean, it's a very arrogant view. It's like every day they're stepping off the top of the mountain after meeting God, you know, and it's like Moses and coming down to everybody and giving the 10 commandments. I mean, you know, there's almost a tonality to them. And that combined with the victimhood, you result in a very warped mindset, a very warped philosophy.
I love this discussion. Yeah. And I would add, and it's really the same thing, only think about it. The left wants to be God in their own universe, which isn't as dangerous as the fact that they want to be God in yours. So
right. I mean, if they want to be God in their universe and create a a commune somewhere up in Idaho or whatever, I don't care.
Go for it. Well, not in Idaho. It's going to be
redistribute their own property, you know, give away everything and just live based upon need.
Yeah, but it's not that. They have to force you.
Yeah.
Right. Because their rules never, ever apply to them anyway. That's why you've got so many millionaire, limousine liberals who are millionaires because they don't have to get rid of their wealth. You have to get rid of yours.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why in fact, because I don't know how long we're going, but I have another appointment in about 6 minutes.
We'll wrap it up soon.
So. Yeah. It really bothers me, breaks my heart that so many Jews, American Jews right now, are kind of hiding. They're hiding under their beds, and it bothers the life out of me. I've talked to a lot of rabbis. I have an appointment in 6 minutes with a rabbi, as a matter of fact, off the air, to talk about why Jews aren't standing up with Christians, because this time Christians are the canaries in the coal mine. Yeah. And Jews are not far behind them, because people of faith are always a threat to socialists and communists. Again, going back to, they want to be God in our universe. So anybody who answers to a higher authority, like Hebrew National, they answer to a higher authority, they have to put them down. And right now there is religious persecution, the likes of the kind of old Soviet Union and China and all the rest. There's nothing new under the sun. They've done this before. It's just a lot of people can't get their brain around, and I haven't either, that this is happening in the United States of America. And people of faith are being persecuted and held to a different standard so that they can have government churches, government synagogues. You know what? Yeah. Not American.
Just like the Soviet Union. Karen, thank you so much for joining me. Let my viewers and listeners know where they can read your excellent work or listen to your program.
Well, it so happens I have the most successful piece that I've had so far. I'm sort of proud of it. Yeah. You can find it at Western Journal. It currently has 56,000 responses. Never got that many. It's called "Complying with Tyranny on Masks Will Bring on More Tyranny, Not Less." The mask thing is a really big deal to me. By the way, I just did WCRN in Massachusetts.
Gary Goldman.
For Gary Goldman. And I had such a good time doing
he's
that.
A good guy. Yep,
that was so much fun. He is a very good guy. He had surgery. He was kind enough to ask me to come on, and I talked to the listeners as well on Saturday morning. But everything, including that podcast that I did for Gary, I'll get up. It is not up yet. At KarenKataline.com. Karen spelled the normal way. Yes, my name is a punchline. Kataline, KATALINE, KarenKataline.com.
Excellent, Karen. Thanks again, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Well, it's great to talk to you. Keep up the great work, Charles. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Same to you.